Good morning. I'm delighted to be here with you. I want to thank Abi for inviting me to share some reflections. I'm going to start with a childhood memory from 1973. I was 8 years old. My mother had just gotten remarried after being widowed a few years earlier. And we had just moved to a new house in a new neighborhood. Our old neighborhood, not far from the UU church where we attended, and the university, and the orchestra, and the museums, was in the economically and ethnically diverse streetcar suburb just over the eastern border from the city of Cleveland. It was like living in a safe, comfortable, and familiar bubble. The new neighborhood was different. It was farther out from the city, at the very end of a streetcar line, less diverse and more working class, outside the bubble. One day, my 10-year-old sister and I set out on our bikes to explore the new neighborhood. On our way home, we decided to take a shortcut through the parking lot of an apartment building. In our path was a group of men. They were sitting together in patio chairs, eating and drinking, and talking and laughing. In the summer of 1973, I looked different than I do now. I had hair. And not just hair, I had a big afro of curly hair. My sister and I looked different than the men. They were old, we were young. Their hair was gray. Our hair was dark and curly or frizzy. Their skin was white. My sister and I had brown skin, even darker than normal, from spending summer days outdoors. These men took one look at us and began shouting, "Get out of here, you blankety blank." And you can fill in the blanks with a swear word and that racial slur. We quickly pedaled around those men and made it home. I'll never forget that day and how I felt. That's when I learned firsthand that a grown person can hate another person, even a child, without knowing them, just based on the color of their skin. Perhaps this was a glimpse of the backlash to all the changes that had happened in the late 1960s and were still happening in the early 1970s. Changes in housing laws, changes in civil rights laws, positive changes that Dr. King and others helped to make by confronting the pain and hatred and brokenness of a society that has a legacy of slavery, fighting hate with nonviolence and love. I didn't know it at the time, but I was living through a revolution. When I was born in 1965, there were no black mayors of U.S. cities. But I grew up as a black kid aware of Carl Stokes, the black mayor of my hometown of Cleveland. And I learned here in this room from Joan Brown Campbell, mother of the first woman mayor of Cleveland, more about the story of how Dr. King traveled to Cleveland in 1965 to campaign for Carl. I didn't realize when I was young that having a mayor that reflected the demographics of his city was revolutionary. And his brother, my congressman Lou Stokes, was one of the first blacks elected to Congress in the modern era. I didn't realize at the time that electing a black congressman, even in a diverse northern city, would have been unthinkable a few years earlier. My mom is black, and so was my late dad. My new stepfather in 1973 was white. My grandmother, Dorothy, born in 1911, was biracial. And now, in 2016, my kids are biracial. My wife, Barry, and I grew up ignorant of the fact that our interracial marriage would have been illegal in many states during our parents' generation before the 1967 Loving Supreme Court ruling, another part of the revolution that Dr. King helped to spark. And revolutions have echoes. One of my proudest moments as a state legislator was voting to extend the rights and privileges and protections of marriage that my wife enjoy to same-gender couples. And much of the credit for that goes to our District 18 state senator and Cedar Laner, Senator Rich Madaleno. As a Black elected official, I get invited sometimes to give remarks in January when we remember Dr. King. First time was in 2009, and I had been in office for about a year. To prepare, I interviewed older relatives and friends to refresh my memory and to get their perspective about his leadership and legacy. My mom reminded me that my grandmother met Dr. King on the day when he spoke at the school where my grandmother was assistant principal. And in 2014, when I was helping my mom sell her house in that neighborhood, where she had lived for 40 years, and going through family belongings, I found the forgotten tape recording my grandmother had made of Dr. King that day. It showed that Dr. King didn't just have a dream, he actively participated in electoral politics. It was late October 1964, and he was in Cleveland, the biggest city of the biggest swing state, working to get out the vote before the presidential election. Family friend Benny Ivy worked for years with Dr. King's widow, Coretta. Benny reminded me that Dr. King was a scholar and an author who wrote a number of books. She said of the books he wrote, Coretta's favorite was his last one, written just a short time before his death. The book is titled, "Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community?" I read the book, and it contains many of the same themes from Dr. King's final speech of March 1968 that Abi shared with me. The urgency of those ideas still resonate today. Like many of you, I've been reflecting on President Obama's legacy as we approach his final days in office. As the first Black president, Barack Obama's election and service is another echo of the revolution that Dr. King helped make possible. President Obama has had many successes, but his election also sparked a backlash that began almost immediately after he took office. During Obama's tenure, a record number of state legislative seats across the U.S. changed from blue to red. This fact and the 2016 presidential election results remind me a bit of those men in the parking lot who yelled at my sister and me back in 1973. Progress and positive change can lead to an angry backlash. The good news is that many people are now motivated to get involved, to learn how to advocate, and to take an active role in working to protect our gains and to advance social justice. We Cedar Laners and Unitarian Universalists never lost sight of the need to keep fighting for a more just world. But now that we have their attention, let's reach out to our friends and neighbors who have recently awoken. Dr. King would want us to share with them the tools that they seek and to help them get involved. It's as important as it's ever been. So let's get to work and not let the haters get us down.